The chandelier above me didn't stop swaying, not because of any wind, but because of the sudden shift in the room's energy. My father had just spoken, and his words clung to the polished walls like smoke from a fire no one wanted to admit had started. "You'll get nothing, Hannah, just like you deserve." He said it casually, as if he were commenting on the weather, as if declaring his only daughter unworthy in front of 40 people, cousins, uncles, board members, lifelong friends, even our old housekeeper, was just another line in a prepared speech. His voice was steady, rehearsed. The only sound afterward was the soft crackle of the fireplace behind me, and the faint clink of a glass being set too hard on a silver tray. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I smiled, because I already knew what he didn't. But before we get there, let me rewind. My name is Hannah Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and I'm the only daughter of Douglas Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Industries, a man known as a titan in logistics and supply chain, and a tyrant in fatherhood. To the world, he's a self-made visionary. To me, he's a man who never once believed his daughter could carry his name forward. Only his son could do that. He believed legacy was something passed from man to man, from father to son, from powerful hands to even more entitled ones. Daughters, we were ornaments, symbols of family unity at galas, smiling faces in photo ops, never successors, never heirs. Growing up in the Whitmore household was like existing in a world where silence was expected and obedience was praised, unless you were Brandon. My brother got to be loud. He got to be messy. He got to fail. And still be celebrated for trying. Me, I had to be perfect, polished, controlled, and even then, I was invisible. So when my father stood at the head of that gleaming conference table, holding a glass of red wine like he was toasting his own immortality, I didn't break. He gestured toward Brandon beside him, who looked smug in his tailored navy suit, sipping his bourbon like the crown was already his. "To the future of this family," my father said, pausing dramatically. "To my son, who will lead us into the next generation, and to my daughter, who chose her emotions over loyalty." There were chuckles, some nervous, some genuine. A few people looked down. My Aunt Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The old family attorney, Mr. Sullivan, cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the room. But my father had taken center stage like always. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because the thing about betrayal is, when you expect it, it doesn't cut the same. I watched them, all of them, play out a performance they had rehearsed in their heads for years. A world where I was excluded, overlooked, erased. But I had rewritten the script months ago. And what none of them knew, not my father, not Brandon, not the shareholders or smug cousins in overpriced blazers, was that the story they were telling wasn't the story that was about to unfold. I sipped my water, crossed my legs slowly, and waited for Mr. Sullivan to open the real envelope, because the moment was coming, and when it hit, no one would be ready. People always assume the worst pain comes from strangers, but the truth is, nothing wounds deeper than being made to feel invisible by your own blood. I was 12 the first time I understood what I was in my father's world. He had just come back from a company retreat in Lake Tahoe, all smiles and cigars, with Brandon trailing behind him in a new Whitmore Industries sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big. He had been allowed to sit in on meetings, shake hands with board members, ask questions about quarterly growth projections at 13. Meanwhile, I had been left home with a tutor and a stack of etiquette books. "Business isn't a place for little girls," my father had said flatly, ruffling my hair like I was a pet, not a person. "Let your brother learn how real men build legacies." It never got better with time. Only more polished, more polite. In high school, I earned straight A's, got accepted into Columbia University early admission, and was named a National Merit Scholar. He sent flowers. Not a phone call, not a handshake. flowers. Meanwhile, Brandon had a D average, wrecked a Mercedes, and dropped out of Princeton twice. Dad gave him a condo in Belltown and a company car to get his mind right. When I told my father I was applying for the MBA/JD dual program at Stanford, he barely looked up from his phone. Why not something simpler? He asked. Marketing, or something that makes you wife material. That one landed hard, but I smiled. I always smiled, because the one thing I learned early on was that emotions gave him ammunition. If I cried, I was weak. If I argued, I was too much. If I stayed silent, I was boring. No matter what I did, I wasn't enough. Or I was too much of the wrong thing. I kept trying anyway. When I was 23, fresh out of grad school, I offered to consult on a failing division at Whitmore Industries, a division that had hemorrhaged nearly $8 million in 18 months. I spent 3 weeks putting together a restructuring plan with clean audits, new supplier contracts, and sustainability projections. He glanced at the front page, then slid it back across the desk. Noble effort, Hannah, but this isn't the place for your passion projects. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, not bitterness, just clarity. He was never going to see me. He wasn't built to. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat at my desk until sunrise. I opened a new document, titled it Independence. Then I built a new plan, one that didn't rely on his permission or his praise or his approval. By the time I turned 25, I'd quietly invested in 3 early-stage startups through a holding company I created under a pseudonym, Viridian Core. I joined advisory boards, took midnight meetings with venture capitalists, consulted in supply chain tech as a ghostwriter for CEOs who'd never admit they needed help from a woman half their age. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I had to breathe somewhere. And I couldn't breathe inside the walls of Whitmore Industries. Every family event was a performance. Every holiday a stage. Brandon giving toasts about tradition. My father boasting about mergers. Me pouring the wine. Laughing in the right places. Playing nice. Wearing beige. Letting my voice go soft so I wouldn't upset the balance. But underneath the silk blouse and soft curls, I was building something, and no one saw it coming, not even me, because part of me still hoped, some naive, aching part, that one day he'd say, "I'm proud of you." Instead, when I turned 28 and asked for a meeting to present a logistics startup I'd been developing for over a year, he laughed. Laughed. Like I'd asked to be Queen of England. "You're a lovely girl, Hannah, but you don't need a company. You need a husband." I said thank you, and walked out of his office. For the last time. They say every empire has a beginning. Mine started on the edge of a hospital bed, with a paper cup full of pills and the fading voice of a man who still saw me. My grandfather, Edgar Whitmore, was the founder of Whitmore Industries, a true patriarch. He built the company from nothing, just 2 freight trucks and a vision, into a global logistics empire. But more than that, he was the only person in the family who never once made me feel like I had to apologize for being a woman. He used to call me Hawk. Said I saw things no one else in the family dared look at. And I'd always remember where the real power lived. When he got sick, it wasn't sudden. Parkinson's crept in like fog, slow, quiet, and relentless. The kind of disease that strips dignity piece by piece. My father visited once a week, Brandon less than that. But I came every morning. I fed him when his hands trembled too hard to hold a spoon. I read him the business pages, even though he pretended not to care anymore. I sat with him during the long silences when he forgot my name. Then apologized for it, and I never once asked him about the will. I didn't have to, because Grandpa started talking. Little by little. "Your father thinks bloodlines build dynasties," he muttered once, eyes half closed. "But it's vision that keeps them alive. And you, Hawk, you see farther than any of them." I smiled, thinking it was just his way of being kind. But then came the day he leaned in, voice sharp, lucid, more focused than he'd been in weeks. "I don't trust your father anymore." I froze. He never said things like that. Not aloud. "He's pushing for power of attorney. Wants control of everything before I'm even gone," Grandpa whispered. "But I'm not blind. I've seen what you've built. Quiet. Smart. No applause, no press releases. But real. You've done what none of them could." It was the first time in years I felt seen. "I don't want the empire to rot in Brandon's hands," he said. "And your father, he's too far gone to fix it." I swallowed hard. "What do you want to do, Grandpa?" "I want a second opinion. A clean legal one. Outside the family." So I helped him. Not because I wanted the inheritance, but because I wanted to protect what he built from being poisoned by the same man who dismissed my every effort. We met with a private firm he trusted, discreet, airtight. Together, we drafted a revised estate plan. It wasn't petty. It was structured, fair, but decisive, and it named me as the primary heir to his controlling interests in Whitmore Industries, bypassing the internal board and family channels completely. It required third-party verification, cognitive assessments, and was sealed with 2 independent witnesses. "Your father will never see it coming," he said the day he signed it. I didn't smile. I just nodded, because even then, I knew this wasn't going to end clean. The week he passed, my father gave a eulogy in front of hundreds, investors, politicians, longtime employees. He wept on cue, delivered quotes from Edgar's old speeches, and ended with a toast to the future of Whitmore Industries in Brandon's capable hands. He never mentioned me. Not once. I sat in the second row, silent, unseen. But the will, it was already in place. And the moment of reckoning, it was getting closer. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received the formal invitation, an embossed envelope with gold trim and my name misspelled on the inner card. Typical. The reading of Edgar Whitmore's final will and testament would take place in the Whitmore Industries executive boardroom. Monday morning, 10 sharp. When I arrived, the room was already nearly full. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, bottles of imported water neatly lined at each seat, and mine was at the far end, next to the radiator. Not a mistake. A message. Brandon sat front and center beside my father, already reclining like the throne was warm beneath him. He held a glass of bourbon, not coffee, not water, like this was a victory party, not a legal procedure. He grinned when he saw me, that slow, condescending tilt of the mouth he reserved for waiters and women he didn't find attractive. I walked to my seat without reacting, without acknowledging the people who either averted their eyes or offered forced smiles. I didn't need pity. I needed silence. Mr. Sullivan, the family attorney, was setting up at the head of the table. He was sharp as ever, glasses low on his nose, spine straight, suit pressed with precision. But there was something in the way he avoided my father's gaze that made my heart start to slow, not speed up. Douglas Whitmore stood abruptly, glass raised. The room quieted instantly. "To the future of this family," he said with that faux warm tone he used in press interviews. "To my son, Brandon, who will carry the Whitmore name with pride into the next generation. And to my daughter, who chose feelings over family and silence over strength." A few people laughed. Nervously, my Aunt Margaret let out a strangled cough. I didn't move. My fingers rested on the stem of my water glass. My heels were crossed precisely at the ankle. My expression? Neutral, because I knew what was coming. Brandon leaned into my father's shoulder, whispering something smug enough to make them both chuckle. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat once. Then again, he adjusted his glasses, opened the folder in front of him, and said, "Let's begin." But before he could read the first line, my father cut him off. "Actually, let me say one more thing," Douglas said, turning to the room. "My father built this company with his hands. I built it with my vision. And now, Brandon will take it into the future. It's only right. It's only fair. He looked at me then, right at me. But Hannah, she's chosen another path. And I respect that. Truly, not everyone's meant for boardrooms and bloodlines. A perfect performance, measured, strategic, public. I could feel eyes on me. Some were sympathetic. Most were indifferent. I smiled. But not the kind that reaches your eyes. Because while they were all watching a man carve out a legacy for his son, they didn't know that the real will hadn't even been opened yet. They didn't know that their precious narrative, the one where I faded quietly into the background, was about to collapse. And they didn't know that Edgar Whitmore, the man they were pretending to mourn, had one final move. And he'd played it for me. Mr. Sullivan didn't respond to my father's theatrics. He simply reached for a second envelope, smaller, heavier, with a deep red seal across the back. The kind no one in the room had ever seen before. This, he said calmly, is the document Mr. Edgar Whitmore signed 3 weeks prior to his passing. It was drafted under private counsel, independent of the Whitmore family legal team, and filed under sealed protocol per his written instruction. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Brandon stopped mid-sip, his lips parting slightly. My father? He didn't flinch. Not yet. Mr. Sullivan broke the seal, removed the pages inside, and adjusted his glasses again. His voice was steady. As per the final directive of Mr. Edgar Whitmore, witnessed and notarized by a third-party law firm, the majority estate. This includes financial assets, properties, and the controlling interest in Whitmore Industries, shall be transferred in full to his granddaughter, Hannah Whitmore. Silence. Not the kind of silence that invites thought. The kind that cracks. Brandon choked, audibly on his bourbon. My father's hand froze in midair. The glass in his fingers tilted, slow and inevitable. Red wine spilled across the documents on the table, blooming like blood across white. Someone gasped. Aunt Margaret covered her mouth. And me? I just sat there. Still, breathing through the moment like it was meditation, because this was the part one had visualized 1,000 times. Mr. Sullivan continued, his tone unchanged. As stipulated, Mr. Brandon Whitmore shall retain access to a personal trust of limited value, but holds no executive power, board voting rights, or legal ownership in Whitmore Industries effective immediately. Brandon looked at me like he didn't understand the language. That can't be right, he stammered. You mean a shared vote? Like joint authority? No, Mr. Sullivan replied. Sole authority. All controlling shares are now in Hannah's name. My father pushed back from the table, the scrape of his chair loud in the room. You must be joking, he said quietly. My father would never do this. I finally spoke. He did, I said softly, my voice like glass, because he saw what you refused to. The temperature in the room dropped. My father slammed his palm against the table. You manipulated him, he growled. You took advantage of a dying man. You think this is some kind of feminist fairy tale? This is corporate war, Hannah. You're not ready for this. Before I could respond, Mr. Sullivan raised a hand. For the record, he said firmly, Mr. Whitmore's mental state was evaluated by 3 separate medical professionals during the drafting process. All assessments confirmed full cognitive function. The changes are legally binding and enforceable. My father began to pace like a caged animal, jaw tight, eyes wild. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed at me. You're going to ruin everything. The company, the family. Your own damn name. I stood slowly. I've been ready, I said. I just stopped waiting for your permission. Brandon looked like a boy who had just dropped his birthday cake. He couldn't even speak. His jaw hung open, the shock rendering him mute. My father leaned in across the table, voice low and venomous. You think you've won something? He whispered. This won't last. You don't have the stomach for what comes next. I didn't blink. I'm not your little girl anymore. And in that moment, something inside him cracked. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't see me as his daughter. He saw me as a threat. And he was right. I didn't celebrate. No champagne. No triumphant exit. No satisfied smirk. I walked out of that conference room the same way I walked in, quiet, composed, deliberate, but inside my chest, something had shifted, because I knew this wasn't over. Men like Douglas Whitmore didn't lose gracefully. They didn't lick their wounds in private and write dignified resignation letters. No, they regrouped, manipulated, slipped through cracks they had created themselves. And I knew my father would come for me. The next morning, before the sun even touched the glass towers of downtown Seattle, I was already at Whitmore Industries. My building now. I entered through the executive garage. No driver, no security escort. Just me in a navy blazer and clean heels, walking through the lobby like I'd done it 1,000 times. Even though this was the first time it truly belonged to me, I went straight to my grandfather's office. His name was still on the door. It wouldn't be for long. I changed the locks. Then I started making calls. Not loud, showy calls. Quiet ones. To every department head. One by one. 30-minute meetings. No assistants. No press. I didn't bark orders or demand loyalty. I asked questions. About morale. About systems. About gaps. About the things no one had ever asked them before, because my father had been too busy performing power. And when I left those rooms, I left with more than answers. I left with allies. But I knew conversations weren't enough. So I did what my father never expected. I left a paper trail. Every meeting documented. Every initiative cross-referenced. Every email tracked. Because I wasn't just leading, I was preparing for the counterattack. And it came. By Thursday, board members started receiving calls. Old golf buddies, whispered concerns, questions about transition optics. One of them forwarded me a voicemail. My father's voice, low and sugar slick. We just need to protect the company from chaos, from emotional decisions. I smiled when I heard it, because he still didn't understand. I wasn't emotional. I was precise. So I did the only thing that would silence the whispers. I called an emergency board meeting. Friday, 3 p.m. The room filled slowly. Tension thick in the air. I stood at the head of the table in a dark suit and soft lipstick. Calm. Unshaken. They expected a plea. Maybe even a meltdown. Instead, I handed out packets. Inside, documented records of embezzlement. Financial statements showing Brandon's misuse of corporate accounts. Evidence of shell company transfers authorized under Douglas's name. And a summary of HR complaints buried under executive discretion. I didn't speak for several seconds. I let the pages speak first. Then I said, "This isn't a damage control meeting. This is a restructuring." Richard Whitmore, yes, he still thought he was Richard the Great, entered 10 minutes late, flanked by Brandon, both in matching navy suits like caricatures of themselves. "Gentlemen," he said, flashing a smile to the room, "let's get ahead of the narrative, shall we?" I didn't look at him. "I already did," I replied. "Please check page 12. They did. The boardroom was quiet except for the turning of paper and the quiet, horrified breath of men realizing they'd bet on the wrong horse. Douglas tried to object. "This is out of context," he snapped. "You don't understand the internal structure." "No," one board member interrupted. "You don't." When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. Unanimous. Brandon's executive access revoked. Douglas Whitmore removed from all corporate dealings, effective immediately. Their key cards were deactivated before they left the room. I walked them to the elevator myself. Douglas didn't speak. Brandon looked like a child about to cry. As the doors began to close, my father turned to me, just once. "You're making a mistake," he said, barely above a whisper. I leaned in, met his eyes, and replied, "No, I'm correcting one." The first week was chaos. Headlines erupted like firecrackers. Heiress ousts patriarch in shocking boardroom coup, Whitmore legacy appended by granddaughter no one saw coming. But inside the building, something else was happening. Something quieter, stronger. I didn't redecorate the office. I didn't fire half the staff or demand a new coffee machine. I didn't rename the company after myself. I listened. I met with every department again, this time not as an observer, but as their leader. I asked what wasn't working, what had been ignored, what they were too afraid to say out loud. And then I changed things, implemented transparency initiatives, expanded maternity leave, reinstated a long-forgotten mentorship program my grandfather once championed, this time focused on women in logistics and operations. The board noticed, but more than that, the people noticed. People who had worked at Whitmore Industries for decades began to look at me differently, not like I was a placeholder or a symbol of rebellion, but like I was the first person in a long time who actually saw them. Still, I didn't celebrate, because legacy isn't a party, it's a promise. And one morning, about 2 weeks after the boardroom vote, I was sitting at the cafe across the street from the Whitmore building, skimming over the launch details of a new philanthropic initiative, when I saw him, Douglas Whitmore, standing on the sidewalk. No driver, no entourage, no polished navy suit, just a man in a wrinkled overcoat, looking up at the glass tower that no longer belonged to him. His expression wasn't angry. It was lost. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and just couldn't bring himself to look directly. I stood slowly, picked up my folder, walked toward the sliding glass doors of the building, and just as they began to close behind me, I turned back. He was still there, still staring. I met his eyes across the pavement. No gloating, no venom, just a truth he couldn't rewrite. "Morning, Dad," I said calmly. The doors sealed between us, and that was it. No monologue, no confrontation, no apology, just distance. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt free. The office was quiet that night, just the soft hum of the city outside and the tick of the antique clock on the wall. The one my grandfather used to wind himself every Sunday. I sat at his old desk, now mine, reviewing numbers, campaign notes, a few thank you emails from staff I barely knew by name. And that's when I saw it, tucked inside the bottom drawer, beneath a bundle of faded property records, was a photo, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. It was me, 8 years old, standing beside my grandfather in the factory yard. He had one hand on my shoulder. I was squinting into the sun, holding a clipboard nearly twice my size. On the back, in faint blue ink, were 4 words: "You always had it." That was all. No explanation, no signature, but I didn't need one. For years, I'd chased something I thought I could only earn if he said it out loud. If my father said it, if the board acknowledged it, if the world saw me. But the truth was, I didn't need to be chosen. I only needed to stop asking for permission to exist. That night, I locked the photo back in the drawer, not as a keepsake of him, but of me, the girl who grew up and refused to stay small, the woman who took a seat at the table, then rebuilt the entire table from scratch. And no, it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about legacy, the kind that doesn't come with applause or magazine covers or backroom handshakes, the kind that's built on every moment you chose yourself in silence, every time you stayed when it hurt, and rose when no one thought you could. Some nights, when the building empties and the city goes still, I still hear his voice, the old one, the kind one, the one that called me Hawk, and I let it echo, just for a moment, because there's comfort in knowing he saw me, and power in knowing. I see myself now, too. So if you're still wondering how this story ends, What happens to men like Douglas and boys like Brandon? The truth is, it doesn't matter. They had their turn. Now it's mine. And if you were me, what would you have done?